make public comment. During any public comment portions, attendees may use the raise your hand feature and will be called upon and unmuted when it is your turn to speak. If joining by phone, use *9 to raise your hand, *6 to mute and unmute. We also have Spanish interpretation services here tonight, available in person and via Zoom. On Point Language Solutions is in the back left corner if anyone needs assistance with interpretation services. Victor and Nicholas will now provide information on how to receive interpretation services if you are in need of them. Victor and Nicholas provide this information in Spanish for the audience.
Test. Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members, all staff, members of the public. Victor Hernandez, Spanish interpreter. Muy buenas tardes, buenas noches. Les queremos dejar saber que les vamos a proporcionar interpretación de toda esta reunión en español, y para poder acceder a esos servicios, ya sea por Zoom, con una tableta o una portátil, usted tendrá que hacer clic en lo que será un icono de un globo, es decir, un mundo que aparecerá al fondo de su pantalla, y usted seleccione lo que es el idioma español. Ahora, si usted está utilizando un teléfono inteligente o una tableta, busque lo que es el menú de 3 puntos, después seleccione interpretación y luego seleccione el idioma en español, y por último usted tendrá que hacer clic en listo o done. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Gracias, Victor. Could I have the clerk take the roll call, please?
Yes, we will start with Councilmember Negengast.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Brownstone.
Here.
Vice Mayor Penrose.
Here.
And Mayor Ruddick.
Here.
All are here on that. Now we have planning commissioners. We have Commissioner Commissioner Ruddick.
I'm here with a dead mic.
Oh.
Just the light doesn't work, the mic's fine.
Yeah, there you go. We have Vice Chair Hernandez.
I am present.
And we have Chair Gorn.
Here.
We have 3 planning commissioners and all 5 council members present this evening.
Great. So this is a special study session of the City Council and Planning Commission to review the City of Half Moon Bay's growth management system, which is Municipal Code Chapter 17.06, also known as Measure D, and the allocation system that implements that system. Before we take a staff report on this item, I just want to lay out a little bit of process here. So I'm going to be a little bit rigorous on asking for Planning Commission and City Council questions and input. So I'm going to start with a City Council member and follow by a commissioner, and then alternate. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I just want to say that we want to keep tonight's discussion at sort of a high level. You're going to want to ask, clarifying questions, but you're going to want to keep your input, in questions like more general. You want to distill it into issues relating to Measure D, as opposed to getting down into the weeds in the form of recommendations on specific changes to the allocation system, that sort of thing. So questions on any of it, are welcome, but, we're not here to redo Measure D or the implementation system tonight, but to give, general direction to staff, and to allow the public to ask questions, become educated on all of Measure D. So I know that we had a very robust discussion on the safety element, as well as the wildfire maps. Went into a lot of detail. I don't want a meeting like that tonight. I'd like us to be done, by 10 o'clock or so. So try to keep your comments, your questions can be detailed, keep your comments as general as possible in the form of, direction to staff for future meetings, because we're going to be talking about, Measure D and the allocation system probably a few times this year. It's already, too late to change things for the 2026 allocation program. So, we have time, it's going to come back. So let's just keep that in mind, when we're commenting and asking our questions. That's all I would ask. And with that, I would ask Leslie and Ocoee to begin their staff report.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council, and Planning Commissioners. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm going to be taking us through an overview of Measure D, and I just want to preface this by saying we tried our best to incorporate as much as we can about Measure D, but this is quite a nuanced item, and so there is a lot to it, and so we may not cover every single detail, but we'll certainly be here to answer any questions that may come up. So tonight I will walk us through the background of Measure D, a little bit on the history of it, and then we'll discuss the process of Measure D, City Council's role, Planning Commissioners' roles, and staff's role. And then we will discuss some of the trends that we've been seeing with Measure D, and I'll provide some information on some updates that have been in discussion, or you or members of the public may have seen, and then information on the next steps. So Measure D is the city's growth management system. This was a voter-approved initiative back in 1999 for Measure D. It requires all new residential units with the exception of a couple exemptions you can see here at the bottom of the slide, and typically accommodates up to 1.5% population growth. It allows for 1% with an additional 0.5% in that downtown area. So Measure D is split into two geographic areas of the downtown and the outside of downtown. The purpose of Measure D was to control the rate, location, and density of residential development in the city. So Measure D was Measure A first came into play in 1991. This was a voter-approved measure at that time, and it allowed for 3% population growth. Between the 80s and the 90s, there was a pretty significant increase in population in the city, and the city was seeing around 2% to 2.9% in population growth throughout those years. So Measure A came along to try to continue to buffer that. And as the population continued to grow, the city saw that this should likely be reduced, so an additional measure was put on the ballot, which was Measure D. And Measure D reduced that population growth rate from 1 to 1.5%. And this was to ensure that some of the infrastructure concerns could be addressed over that time, such as traffic on Highway 1 that was starting to occur, and water availability within the city. So, and also to preserve Half Moon Bay's character. Measure D, however, was not actually implemented until 2009 after it was certified as part of the local coastal program by the Coastal Commission. As I mentioned before, Measure D is broken into two geographic areas, the downtown and the outside of downtown. That's going to continue to come up throughout this study session. It's currently defined as the redevelopment survey area, which was established in 1998 by City Council resolution. It was established separately from Measure A and Measure D. It was, since it was established in 1998, it was looked at based on the resolution. It was established to identify specific redevelopment areas throughout the city. And then with the introduction of Measure D, it was implemented as that downtown area as part of Measure D, and has remained the downtown area. With Measure D, it can be broken down into 4 main steps that are happening annually. The first step is the annual unit authorization, and I'll be talking about each of these more in depth as we go on. The second step is the initial application period, and then there's a scoring ratification that occurs and a transfer process that can happen. The unit authorization occurs annually in December. This is for the preceding the upcoming Measure D year. So most recently, we had the unit authorization at the City Council meeting on December 16th, 2025. where we established the number of allocations for this upcoming 2026 Measure D year. The number of units that are authorized is a base 1%, and City Council can decide to allow an additional 0.5% in that downtown area. Additionally, during this process, typically the City Council will also review the application, a fiscal analysis, and any other criteria that should be considered prior to that upcoming year. The allocations that are authorized at this meeting can be broken down as this graphic shows. So we have the total amount of allocations, that's going to be 1 to 1.5%, and then it's split in those two areas with the base in the downtown, but also a bonus 0.5% in the downtown. Historically, City Council has approved that additional 0.5% annually. The second part of the process is the initial application period. This is where we currently are, where the application period is open to anyone from January 1st to January 31st. However, if there's less applications for allocations received, then this application period can actually remain open through September 1st. So typically what we're seeing is in the outside of downtown, we receive more applications than there are available, and therefore that application period will close after January 31st. However, in the downtown area, we haven't been seeing that given that additional bonus percentage partially. And therefore, the downtown allocations, at least over the last several years, have remained open until that second deadline. And so when we do, like I mentioned with the outside of downtown, have more applications for allocations than are available, then we actually have to go into a scoring process in order to identify how these allocations will be allocated. So we'll discuss that a bit more in step 3. We have applicant resources available to anyone interested in applying for Measure D. As a result of some recommendations from the Planning Commission back in March, we also tried to up the number of resources and just the usability of some of these resources to make it more and more friendly for our applicants to understand the process. So we've implemented FAQs on the website. Also, a handbook has been put together to help guide applicants through the scoring process and the different criteria within the scoring. And then staff remains available for consultations, and anyone still looking to apply for this 2026 year is encouraged to set up a consultation with staff within the next week or so would be the best. The third step is that scoring ratification. As mentioned, this is only necessary if more allocations are applied for than are available, which we are typically seeing for properties outside of downtown. This scoring ratification must occur by April 1st. And so staff goes through and reviews the scoring that has been identified by the applicant within their scoring criteria table of their application. Staff will verify the selected criteria and ensure the scoring adds up. And then bring that forward to the Planning Commission with a recommendation of who will be receiving an allocation based on score. The scoring criteria is codified in section 1706.120. The original criteria, which is still being used, was based on the Build It Green program that was in place at the time. But in 2020, there were some revisions made to what criteria was actually scored upon. So while all the criteria remains the same and no amendments took place, some criteria was essentially just removed from the scoring as it would be required of any applicant and based on building code or state law. There is no minimum score to qualify. We get this question a lot, and it is just based on how many applications are received that year, what people are selecting for, and we have been seeing a general increase in the scores to meet the cutoff. But again, very dependent based on how many people are applying. The scoring criteria is broken down into 6 categories within the application, as well as what's in the code. It's infill sites, home size, scale, and clustering, walkability, design for safety and social gathering, design for diverse households. This more relates to having items like a 0-step entrance, grab bars in the bathroom, and landscaping. So how the process works is when applicants submit their application, they have to fill out a scoring criteria table that's located within the application. As I mentioned, staff will then review this, and then we'll rank it and provide that recommendation to the Planning Commission. An example of one of the items that staff will go through and score, while staff is putting quite a bit of time in to review every single application thoroughly, there are some items that you might see more variation in from project to project. For example, one item is the walkability. This criteria specifically consists of a score out of 12 points, and it's based on the location of the property. So this is actually outside of the applicant's control how they could score on this. So what staff will do to ensure that everyone is being scored equally and ensuring this is a very objective process is we create a buffer for every single application project location. For example, here on the screen, this is a buffer for a half-mile radius around City Hall. And then staff will zoom in, look at the varying options there. So that those 12 points, some of them include being within that half-mile radius of the library, the post office, a school, a restaurant. And so you would see here, based on Half Moon Bay City Hall's very central location, it's going to meet most of that criteria and be awarded those points. Here's an example of what's typically brought forth as an exhibit to the Planning Commission to ratify the scoring. This is based on the 2025 Measure D rankings, so this would have been back in March. This is what the Planning Commission awarded scoring based on. So you see the top in the green are applicants that have scored high enough within the top, I believe it was 22 applicants or allocations being applied for, and those in blue were deferred to either wait for the transfer process or apply again in this upcoming year. The final step in Measure D is typically the transfer process. This is at the discretion of the City Council, whether they choose to allow for transfers, and then how these transfers may be allocated. While there is no criteria within the code specifically relating to transfers, the City Council did establish some key criteria to consider back in 2019 by resolution. And these transfers are only available for remaining downtown base allocations. So that additional 0.5% that the council may approve each year is not available as part of the transfer process. Some trends that we've been seeing in Measure D over the year, the key one has been an increase in ADU demand. This specifically was seen following ADU ordinance updates in 2018 and 2020, along with the continuous changes in state law. We've also continued since those years been seeing the outside of downtown having more demand for allocations than available. Therefore, the scoring has come into play every year since 2020. And then just this continuous discussion of potential revisions or improvements that can be made to Measure D is a common trend that we continue to see brought up and discussed. This table was located in the staff report. It aims to show how much demand there is for ADUs in this overall process. So as you can see, specifically within the outside of downtown, ADUs might be making up anywhere from 50 to 75% of applications, averaging around 60. And so that is a pretty significant demand that we've seen over the last 5 years for those ADUs. This is another table of a question that has come up pretty frequently, and this table was included in the staff report or provided to as a memo. I apologize, I can't remember, but it was distributed as part of the materials for the city council meeting back in December. So here you can see, this is just breaking down the number of allocations issued each year, the number of building permits issued from that year, and then how many of those allocations are either in process, meaning they're still going through entitlement, or remain valid because they haven't reached the expiration date, and then how many have expired. Some future updates that may come with Measure D or have been in discussion include the Cycle 6 housing element has committed the city to making some changes to Measure D. These changes will include revising the allocation requirement for ADUs from a full allocation to a percentage of allocation, such as a half allocation. Additionally, it's committed the city to revising Measure D to look at rolling over certain allocations that have gone unused for the next year for ADUs in affordable housing. Some other administrative improvements to be considered will be potentially some scoring updates to be discussed in the future, such as consistency with new fire regulations, improving the allocations calculation methodology for identifying the number of units scored each year. There are a few quirks with that staff's identified could use some revision just to improve the process. And additionally, considering revising the Measure D downtown map. This did come up previously in 2024, looking at putting this on as part of a ballot measure and using the town center map that's located within our LUP and whether that would be more reflective of that downtown area. The first two of these items on this slide should be able to be done through code amendments. However, revising that downtown map and potentially some other changes that may come up down the line would require a ballot measure to make those changes. Here is a bit more to show you the map that we were just mentioning. So on the left, you'll see the current Measure D downtown area. And on the right, you'll see a comparison of in orange, that's going to be that current downtown area, as well as the red. And then the blue are areas that are located within our town center, but are not considered part of the downtown area currently with Measure D. Next steps in the process. So we're currently accepting applications. The last day will actually be January 30th, as that's the last business day in January. There's going to be 70 total allocations available for 2026. And then if scoring is required, as anticipated, the Planning Commission would be reviewing that scoring in March or very early April. And then lastly, if there's remaining base allocations and still demand for some of those outside of downtown allocations, we would be coming back to the City Council to look at the possibility of transfers in September. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. So let's move to clarifying questions. And I'm going to start with the council member and then move to Planning Commission. And at this time, I'll start with Councilmember Nagengast.
Thank you, and you never get enough information about Measure D. It's always, I've learned over the years, it's not so simple. And it gets more complicated as we go on. ADUs are a different animal today than they were even 20 years ago, or probably, even when this was voted on in 1999. I have a question, and I had asked earlier about expired or unused Measure Ds. And, I see now we can go to 2021. If we had to go to prior years to that, is it possible, I'm not saying to do that now, but if we had to, could staff find out from 2009 to 2021? Or is that just not possible?
I'm not sure we could go all the way back to 2009. It would be dependent on retention policies and what has been kept over the years, as well as just the record in general gets a bit more difficult to review as we go further back, and certainly times changed in 2020, a lot more became electronic. So that's why we have a lot better numbers from 2020 on. But I think we could go back a little further than 2021, though it would take a bit of staff time to really dig into that and try to get good numbers.
Okay, and then what criteria, I'm just going to add on to that. How do we determine an allocation as expired?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. The Measure D allocations are treated with a 1-year expiration date. However, once the applicant of that Measure D allocation has applied for additional permitting, such as a coastal development permit or other planning entitlement, we essentially consider that vested at that time as they're working towards actually developing and utilizing that Measure D allocation. So it can, the exact timeline can be not exact, given it depends how long applicants may be working through the process, but it is that 1-year expiration from that initial allocation to moving forward with next steps.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner and Vice Chair Rick Hernandez?
Do we need to ask all of our questions at one time, or we're going to keep going through?
Well, start, and I'm sure once we take public comment, there may be more questions, but yeah.
One of the really overwhelming criteria from a scoring perspective is the idea of having, taking on a deed restriction to provide affordable units. And I asked a question beforehand about this topic, and I saw the response. So I'm just going to sort of restate my question and make sure I understand what I think the response is. So we award a pretty significant bonus if you say you're going to do a deed-restricted ADU or the main part of your property. Basically, you shoot to the top of the scoring on every project that is elected to do that. And from the staff response, it seems like we're not tracking that after the Measure D has been awarded, the permit has been issued, the house has been built, and 4 years later, if somebody decides they're not going to rent out the property, or they're not going to have, they're not going to conform with what they agreed to when they got the Measure D, we don't have a system for tracking this. It's kind of a concern. And so, did I read that right, that we're not tracking this?
Thank you. You did read that right. However, what's not in our response is that as it stands today, there are not that many deed restrictions that have been completed. So we have some larger projects that have the similar deed restriction, but at this point, we don't have a lot of deed restrictions that have been completed for these single-family residences. But as we approve more and more of these projects and require the deed restrictions, because that's the only way they can get their Measure D allocations, then we will have to develop some kind of tracking mechanism for that. We don't have that now. and it would probably take a significant amount of staff time to track it.
Okay. I'm also, during the last review we had in March, we had a tie for last place, and there were a couple of applicants who were petitioning to get approved during our planning commission meeting. And at the time, we were using a walkability score that didn't include at least one establishment that qualified as a grocery store. And, you know, it was a bodega, you know, it was an oversight. I want to be clear, when we do the final scoring system, regardless of what exists or doesn't exist or what we do or don't track, everybody's getting measured by the exact same businesses. So we may have missed a bodega, we may have missed a chiropractor's office, which qualifies as a medical establishment, but everybody who goes through the application process is being held to the exact same standard. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And if I may, I'm happy to also speak to that issue, some changes that we have incorporated to help make this more clear for applicants. As the scoring criteria went last year in terms of grocery stores, everybody was treated the exact same, and that's the grocery stores, the criteria you're referring to with that walkability, where we did only have 3 identified grocery stores that were qualifying as grocery stores based on our current definition. To make that more obvious for applicants, within that handbook this year, we provided definitions for every single one of those criteria as to what meets that definition and does not. So you'll find a definition for a grocery store, and this may open up to some of these smaller markets. It may not. It is a pretty thorough definition. And also as part of that process, we do notify all applicants prior to coming forward to the Planning Commission with the scoring, notify them of their scores, whether they are being recommended for an allocation or not, and if they do have any questions or concerns, they are encouraged to come in, review the scoring with us, and they may bring up any concerns with staff at that time for additional review, and then they also have that opportunity at the Planning Commission as well, which we saw last year, to bring up some of those questions as well. But yes, everyone is scored under the same criteria.
Great. And then my final question is, in a given year from what I see since 2020, in a given year between 7 and 21 units may not receive, people will apply for a Measure D and they won't get it. And typically, they would qualify in the next year, but we've had in 2022, 2023, and 2024, we've had between 4 and 6 applicants not receive a Measure D over multiple years. So it's a handful of people who've been affected by not being able to qualify for a Measure D. Okay, thanks.
Did you want an answer to that? Clarification from staff?
I saw a nod of yes. So.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to it further too. Yes, so during those years in the middle there, I'm happy to, actually, sorry, I don't have this, I might. Yeah, so here is what Commissioner Hernandez was referring to. This was in the response of the memo that went out to the Planning Commission, the public, and the City Council today. So you can see in 2022, 2023, and 2024, there were several applicants that were having to apply year after year and were not receiving allocations, despite most of them making their best effort to continue to improve their score. And part of this is some of that scoring criteria is location-based, and not all of it is within the applicant's control. So we were seeing applicants that were making their best effort to maximize their scoring, but given their location, it wasn't in their favor. And as the competitiveness of this process continued to increase. They just were struggling to get there. Fortunately, as you can see in 2025, we have been able to, we don't have any more of these recurring applicants. That was able to be cleared out with the transfer process that allowed for more applicants to receive those allocations and to consider alternative criteria if need be.
Honestly, I think that's a really good question, and we want to understand, the reasons for those folks, applying for multiple years and still being, not being able to be competitive, and whether there's anything that can be done, to address that situation. So, any further questions at this time? Okay, I'll ask Councilmember Johnson if you have questions, clarifying questions for staff.
Clarifying, I don't know if it's clarifying, but I was just wondering on the points allocation for the ADUs versus JDUs, are they going to always be the same, or are they, JDUs, are they still involved as an ADU?
I think that's to be looked at more in depth as we get deeper into the conversations of how these code amendments and the fractional allocation might be applied. So we don't have a specific answer at this time. It would come as that discussion happens with that process.
And then the other question I had, I'm not sure, but are we going to be thinking about changing for the fencing material because of the fire map hazards? Because the criteria that's listed isn't really matching what we're thinking about doing.
It's certainly something else that can come up as part of the discussion with these code amendments. It is part of the criteria that's in our code right now, so it's not something that can be changed without those amendments, but it's something that can be discussed down the line.
And then on the mappings, when are we planning on looking at the maps? Because I've heard a lot of constituents that are complaining about the maps not being drawn well, or they're hard to dissect.
Yeah, regarding the maps, that does require a ballot measure initiative that can be brought forth by the city, given council direction, or an applicant, or sorry, a member of the public can also try to get an initiative on the ballot as well. The next opportunity to put ballot measure initiative would be this upcoming November, and that process would need to occur closer to June through August, that those initiatives would need to be identified, and we would have to go through that process of bringing that ballot measure initiative forth again if directed by the council.
Would that be something that we would bring up, if I would bring that up at the, which we're planning for this year, priority settings?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ruddick.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Is this mic on?
You have to talk right into it.
Okoye, thanks for that. It's a very useful report, very interesting. Could you go for a moment again, please, to your table that has the expired and unused numbers? Based on staff's knowledge of certificates that have expired, do we feel that a one-year expiry date is a good one because it puts certificates in the hands of people who are going to actually do something with it, or is it too short a period and it's robbing otherwise well-meaning residents of getting on with their projects?
I think it can be viewed from both perspectives. So that would be something to discuss. I certainly think that as these conversations for improving the process come up, that it would be worth potentially exploring that expiration and seeing if additional criteria could be implemented to clarify that or assist applicants with that and look at that timeline. But to answer your question, I think there's an argument for both sides.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that you say that. There's probably a mix. Is the one-year expiry date fixed in the original referendum?
It's more so there is some there is some language regarding the expiration dates in the code. However, over the years, this one-year expiration date has become more of a practice and something that was set through precedence over time, as the code is not very clear as to how this should be applied.
Okay. And what, give me a sense of what unused means. So they haven't yet expired, but...
Unused is referring to, sometimes we have applicants where they maybe initially got, say, 3 allocations and ended up only exercising 2 of the allocations. So in that case, I didn't feel like it was fit to refer to them as expired, though they are still expired. But those were cases, some of those may be where the project did move forward, but the applicant may have not used all of the units that they had applied for or received.
Okay, thank you.
I'll move on to Councilmember Roundstone.
Thank you. I want to follow up on the folks, the handful of people who continually were denied the allocation. And that could have been either an ADU or not, right? Both?
I believe in this case, we were just seeing this happen mostly with single-family residences.
Okay. And you said, you know, people over the years made continuing efforts to adjust their application. And you said a lot of that, if I heard you correctly, had to do with walkability.
Yeah, not just the walkability. There are some other criteria as well that may be outside of the applicant's control. There's a handful of criteria within their control and outside of their control.
So I was just trying to understand, what are examples of being, walkability is your distance from desirable locations. So how does one improve their distance from a desirable location in their application? I wasn't clear.
Yeah, that's part of the speed bump some of these applicants are faced with, and what is making it hard for them to continue to improve their score. One example is there was an applicant that began applying, I think they ended up having to apply 4 or 5 times. They just received theirs in this 2025 transfer process. But initially, the process wasn't as competitive, and so they had applied for more of what they were seeking. When they were rejected, they found any identified criteria that they could increase their score upon. So the walkability, they weren't able to increase their score on, but some options like reducing the size of the home to increase, there is an item that allows, based on the square footage, any more room to increase their score further. And so they were at a point over this last year or so where they were each year trying to find a way, and there was really nothing more that could change for them at that point. There's even some criteria in that case that changed, like one of the criteria is related to your distance to a transit stop. Samtrans actually revised one of their routes and actually brought this property into one of the transit stop routes, and so that also helped their score. So you can see there's some things that are changing and evolving that aren't in their control, and then there's some that are in their control. So it's a very nuanced problem.
Thank you.
This might be a situation where, like home hardening, to address the issues with the fire maps, might give people an opportunity to move up in line, because that'll be, kind of a critical, I think, scoring item. So I just want to throw that out there. So I'll move on to Chair Gorn.
Hey there. I did have a question about the expirations. So I thought that Measure Ds expire after a year, but you're saying that if they are showing signs of building, that they want a building permit, that it's extended. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
It is a little more objective than that. We do require that they actually have so they have 1 year from that the receiving their certificate to actually needing to formally submit an application through the city
For a
to
building, for a permit.
seek additional permits. Yeah.
Okay.
Given that the city does require coastal development permits for most of these projects, as well as then building permits, and it's kind of a multi-step process. That's why that is, because it is not totally reasonable for every applicant to be able to go from receiving their Measure D allocation to building issuance within a year, given the number of steps in the process and the review timelines.
Okay.
But they do need to formally submit. If they just say, oh, I'm gonna submit, that's not gonna extend that timeline. But we do also allow for 1 6-month extension if upon request. So if an applicant requests for that extension, we'll award a 6-month one.
Okay. So I also note Measure Ds aren't transferable, right? So, but I did wonder, we talked a little bit about this possibility of an administrative remedy where if someone was not going to use, there's both unused and expired, but if they're not going to use it, can someone else apply for it if they do it within the year? So like at a review at 9 months, if you have, I mean, there were 25 of them over 4 years that didn't get used. So is that a possibility that administratively you could review them at 9 months and decide and see that some of them aren't going to be used and open it up to have some of those Measure Ds transferred to somebody who would use them?
This would be something that would have to be just discussed further. It's going to require more review of the code. I think an applicant's at least entitled to their year to utilize that, but around that point, I think that there's discussion from there to continue to look at is there an avenue to implement code amendments, or if a ballot measure were to be required to open up something like that within the code. As mentioned, there is the provision within the housing element that will pursue making code amendments that would allow to roll over some of these unused, specifically to ADUs or affordable housing units.
So I just had one other thing that I wasn't really clear on, that maybe is in there that I don't see. And that is you have a list, right, of the applications outpacing Measure Ds, right? That there's a certain number of Measure Ds available and there's too many applications. But then some of those Measure Ds get awarded during the transfer process. So do we have a stat that shows that progression? Because I don't think that there's that many not that many applications left over after the transfer process. Is that somewhere and I'm missing it?
So this year was one of the first years since I think 2021 that the transfer process actually occurred, because the transfer process can only occur if base downtown allocations remain available. And so over the last few years, between 2021 and 2025, all of those base downtown allocations were being awarded and applied for by that September 1st deadline. And so 2025 was the first very recent year where we actually had this transfer process. And so some of those applicants just received their Measure D in September 2025. And that did clear that backlog pretty well of those applicants that weren't receiving allocations.
Thanks so much.
Commissioner Hernandez, I'm going to give everybody a second bite at the apple, but I'm going to complete with council members who haven't had a chance to comment yet. So I'll ask Vice Mayor Penrose if you'd like to ask questions.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent report, and I really can understand what you're saying, which is nice. One question, is there, in the criterion for scoring, is there a difference made between a new single-family residence with an ADU and an existing single-family residence that wants to add an ADU?
Yes, there is a bit of a difference, but the main thing there that within the scoring that really breaks apart these applications is more so whether the project includes an ADU or not. So ADUs are incentivized through the scoring criteria. So
Yeah.
a project including an ADU, whether with a new proposed single family or with an existing single family, is going to qualify for certain additional scoring just by having an ADU as part of the project. And then there's additional criteria with it being an ADU-only application is what we refer to them as, meaning it's an ADU with an existing single-family residence, where additional criteria are just awarded to the ADU on the basis that there is limited review with an ADU, and so some of these landscaping criteria is specifically where you might start seeing the difference, given that the scope of landscaping with an ADU is quite minimized. And so there you might see a bit more difference between those new single families with ADUs and the existing single family with just an ADU being proposed.
So there's only one criterion you're talking about for scoring, and that is landscaping?
There's several. Landscaping is all of category 6, essentially. Not every single one is just awarded to ADUs, but one example would be there is a criteria for including a shade tree in your project. And so a single family residence may need to demonstrate where they're going to plant a new shade tree, or at least they're committing themselves to having that as a condition of approval with an entitlement. Whereas an existing single-family residence that's just applying for an ADU, if there's an existing shade tree on the site, that ADU is going to be awarded points without having to plant another shade tree. Does that make sense? So there's a few criteria like that, but that's just one example.
Okay, great. And then the next question I have is maybe very simplistic, but it's why does it take so damn long between January and April for somebody to get their
Yeah, so as mentioned,
score?
Staff do go through every single application very thoroughly to look at the scoring, and this is often one staff member that is taking on the process. Last year, we received 47 allocations that were being applied for. So that staff member has to go through and score each and check the scoring of each and every application to ensure everybody is being treated the same. And then another staff member takes an additional review period to then verify all of that scoring. So it's a little shorter for that staff member, but it still requires a great deal of time to go through all of these applications on top of staff's existing workload, as we have to keep those items moving. And I would say review of an application might take a staff member anywhere from around an hour or more to ensure that it has been reviewed very thoroughly. And then there's the process with ensuring all applicants have been notified as well. So typically there's about another week in there where staff is dividing and conquering, calling and emailing every single applicant to ensure that they've been notified of their status prior to going to the Planning Commission. And then there's the preparation time for bringing forth that item to the Planning Commission, which is preparing staff reports, the report, putting together the scoring in a digestible manner that can be an exhibit. So it is it's a much more in-depth process than I think typically the public sees that staff's doing behind the scenes, and we know it can feel like a long process, but it really does require quite a bit of review time, and that's why it ends up taking as long as it does.
Yeah, I think I hear exactly what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, but I also think that the public deserves to get things done as quickly and efficiently as possible. And if there's any way we can look at the process and shorten it, I think that would be a good thing. That's all.
Okay, I'm going to ask my questions last. I know that Commissioner Hernandez had an additional question, and I'll open it up to anybody else who wants to ask more questions.
I wholeheartedly agree with the Vice Mayor's assessment of not just the Measure D process, but I think once somebody's gotten their Measure D, not just the time frame where they're told they can move forward, but whatever we can do to streamline the process. I've heard tremendous feedback from many, many people that it takes too long. So, and I know we were better than we were when I built my house and went through a Measure A back in the day, but it is one drumbeat I hear is it's never fast enough, and I just will leave it at that. Just so I understand what I think I heard you say, during the normal allocation process, we go through a Measure D. Decision is established in January. The final decision is ratified in April, and that's when an applicant is officially notified that they've gotten their Measure D. Unless there's some other process that happens in September, those people who are awarded a Measure D have a year to apply for a building permit. And if they haven't quite gotten it together, they have another 6 months if they ask for approval and get it. And so after that 18-month period, unless, again, if I'm doing it in April, the expectation is that would then expire. And what happens with those expired Measure Ds? They just go away forever?
Correct, yeah, they're lost to the void.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anybody else? Councilmember Nagencast.
Thank you. But that void is something perhaps we're looking about bringing them out of the void, right? Isn't that part? There's a discussion, and I heard that tonight, about the possibility of less than a full allocation for an ADU, or these expired or unused allocations that could be rolled over. And I don't know how many years back you go. That's why I was kind of curious. Do we throw 25 on the market, out there all of a sudden or not? But I heard they could be done through code amendments. Are we confident that we can do code amendments for these, or are we still in that process thinking out whether it needs to go back to a ballot measure? Or are we okay saying we could probably do this as through a code amendment?
In terms of what is in the housing element, that I think we're confident that can be done through code amendments. If there were other things introduced that are not identified in the housing element currently as commitments the city has made, those are things that would have to be reviewed as to, is this a code amendment or is this a ballot measure?
Okay, so then these potential rollovers and/or less than a full allocation for the ADUs could be done through a council code amendment.
Correct, with coastal commission
Yes.
certification and all that.
Understood. Yes, thank you.
Anybody else? Chair Gorn?
Just, I've never really gotten an answer to this one question. If the school builds a lot of housing on school property, do those require a Measure D?
I think we'll look closer into it. From my understanding, they would require Measure D allocations.
Steve?
Thank you. Akoi, would you mind showing your slide that has the current downtown map versus the LUP downtown? I want to see if I'm correct about this, but my guess is that the anxiety about the weird map that we have been using for Measure D as opposed to the LUP map is, if we use the LUP map, downtown would be bigger and outside of downtown would be smaller, and this would better match the demand that we get from both segments for Measure D certificates.
I think that is some of the thought there. I think, at least speaking on when this was brought forward previously, some of that discussion was surrounding the fact that, I think as you mentioned, the town center is a bit more reflective of the downtown. And yeah, we would be increasing some of that area of where there might be some of these infill sites that would be included then in that downtown area. And I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but with the previous ballot measure initiative that was brought forth, we did do some analysis as to, in years past, how would using this map as opposed to the existing map impact the number of allocations that were applied for in downtown and outside of downtown. And from my recollection, it wasn't a major change, but it would have had some variation to it. And so that would be back in some of those materials from 2024. But if this came up in the future, we could certainly bring that research forward again.
Is there any other reason why we ought to be using the LUP map rather than the funky one from the redevelopment plans?
I don't think there's any specific reason. I mean, our land use plan does encourage development within our town center area in the same way that Measure D is encouraging more development and infill in that downtown area. So that's part of that thought process of utilizing that town center map. But should a map amendment or ballot measure be brought forth, there's also nothing tying it to utilizing that town center map. It's just considered reflective and aligns with the policies of our local coastal program.
Thank you.
I can follow on there. So one of the problems with the current map is that it includes lands that are currently being farmed. I think some of them are open space reserve, maybe. Some of those east of downtown, and also the one that you see, it's like up by the sand plant. So there's lands in there that are kind of inappropriate, per our policy. But the other thing too is, we just authorized 34 Measure Ds for a project that's actually, in the town center, but because it didn't conform to the current map, it will compete with applications, outside of downtown. So you're likely to get more, multifamily development in the town center, and by redrawing the map, that puts them squarely in the downtown bucket as opposed to the outside of downtown. So they open up more for the outside of downtown area. Am I wrong about that?
You're correct. And the property that I think you're referring to is actually located in that blue area, just to give some context to the public. It's actually right at the bottom of the blue area on the left, bordering the downtown area.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Okay, I just have a couple. So I think it's like on page 5. It says something like, a Measure D allocation is considered vested and remains valid once the applicant has applied for entitlement permitting. The applicant is actively working toward permitting and no follow-up permits expire. So my recollection is that's something that staff sort of interprets as opposed to that language actually being in code and codified, saying that this is how we'll handle it. We will vest them at this certain point, but that's something more that's a practice that staff does as opposed to actually being in the code. Am I right about that?
Correct, yeah, that practice goes pretty far back, but that is what has been carried forward year after year.
So that might be something, though, that we review in terms of, cleanup language that might codify it, or have language that's, supportive of it, just so it's clear to the public, when things vest, when they don't, how they vest, et cetera. So I just wanted to call attention to that because I did not see that in the code. And then, so how often has the Planning Commission reviewed the points and the criteria? And it seems to me that maybe there's time now to do that, makes sense. And maybe we should do it, more frequently, but I'm just wondering, how often have we actually sat down and looked at the criteria compared to, current events, like what's happening right now? What are the mandates that we have for, building codes or zoning codes, and, how do we reflect that, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, the last time, I think that we looked at making some, not changes, but varying interpretations to improve that scoring or to take out some of that scoring criteria was 2020. And so we haven't actually had a thorough sit down and discussion about that since then.
I think it was Commissioner Hernandez who asked about the deed restriction process. So what is that process exactly? Now, I know how that happens, state agency buys land and we put deed restrictions, but what does someone have to do to deed restrict their property? What do you expect them to do that?
Yeah, so I'll give a little more context also, since we didn't touch on it much in the presentation, just for the public's understanding, if that's okay. But the criteria that keeps being referred to is there is one scoring item on the application that is worth 35 points. That's the highest scoring criteria on the checklist. Most of the criteria are around 5 points per item. And so that 35 points is a pretty large incentive for an applicant to elect to deed restrict one or more of the units to below market rate, lower income, to lower income housing. And it does require a legally binding agreement. And so that's where that deed restriction is coming into play. So when an applicant is, first of all, looking to do this, we do try to ensure that they've been well educated on what this means, such as what you're asking right now. That process, with Measure D, requires a 55-year legally binding agreement to only rent or sell the property at whatever elected affordability level they choose. Granted, it's within that low or lower. And that those affordability levels are set at the state level or defined by the state. And so then an applicant seeking that is then going to, as part of their entitlement process and prior to building permit issuance, be required to enter into an agreement, such as an affordable housing agreement, that will be recorded as part of the record for that property, that shall only be rented or sold based on whatever they've elected for. And then that would then be reviewed, and as Leslie mentioned earlier, answering Commissioner Hernandez's question, typically then we hope as these come up more and more that we can implement a process for continuing to ensure that this is being enforced and maintained. Right now, we don't have many that have gotten to that point, if any, where they've reached full construction, at least for like a single family. And so that would be something that needs to be implemented moving forward to ensure that they are upheld to this. But there is a legally binding agreement there that they are expected to adhere to.
And that agreement follows successors in interest, like if they sell it, it's part of the deed, and they have to disclose it at the point of sale?
Yes, Mayor. It would be an agreement that's recorded against the property, and that would run with the land.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for that. Good answers. Have you looked at all, I know that just administering the program is complex, and you're doing a lot of hard work around it, and you're doing a lot to make sure that you're fair. Have you looked at the time it takes between allocating a Measure D and the completion of construction and the sign-off by the building department? Like, how fast are these things getting built? How many can we say have actually been built, say since 2020? What's that process from the beginning to end? What does that look like?
We wouldn't have a very good timeline to go off of. This timeline is going to vary a lot depending on applicants' turnaround time, the actual scope of the project. So there's a lot of factors in there that could draw out the process or make the process quicker. And so it is pretty difficult to provide a general timeline on that. In terms of how many have been built, we try to use that building permit issuance that I was showing earlier, and I can bring back up. That gives a good idea of their last permit, and then they need to continue to go through the process. And staff has been keeping a record to, at the end of every year when we're coming forward, we're looking at how many building permits were finaled and how many were completed, or finaled and how many were issued. And so we would have an idea if we went through and gathered all of those numbers, but we haven't actually run the calculation on finaled, just what we've provided you, which is building permit issuance.
Yeah, I know there was a person on my street who's still, trying to get construction complete, and I know that the electrical work with PG&E was a big bottleneck. So this is kind of separate from actually looking at the allocation system in Measure D, but at some point we might want to just review, this other piece of the process, like how are we getting these things built? Because I think, HCD at some point is going to say, how are you delivering on your promise, to get these things built? So at some point, just review the process, and are there tweaks that we need? Do we need to have a meeting with PG&E to try to, get these things done faster? So I'm just suggesting that we might take some time in the future to review that whole thing, once they got their CDP, and how fast are things moving, and what are the bottlenecks for people?
Thank you. I'll just add that as part of the implementation plan update, we will be revising the code on ADUs to comply with the most recent standards, which will really expedite the ADU approval process.
Okay, great. All right. Those are all the questions I have. So I think we can open it up to public comment at this time. We can start in the room, give everybody 3 minutes, because there's not many people here, and then move on to any online commenters. So do we have any speaker slips? Sorry? Yeah.
Good evening. Greg Jameson. Hello, everyone. One of the thoughts I had about the people that are making applications and are maybe having to come back a second or a third year, I'm wondering if maybe if they paid their fee, they went through the process, they didn't get one, maybe the next year they could get some kind of points for reapplying. Maybe, 3 points or something like that. And maybe that'll get them over the hump to get in and get an application for the following year.
Mm-hmm.
Just an idea.
Ideas are welcome. Yeah.
I have no one online. I don't see anyone raising their hand.
Is there no one else in this room who would like to speak?
I see one here. Go ahead. You can just state your name at the podium.
Come to the podium, though.
Nancy Fontana, thank you. Okay, I came here merely tonight to learn more about Measure D and that sort of thing, but I know we're not supposed to ask questions, but on the deed restriction thing, something that, I know people that have, they live in their home, and then they have a big yard, and then they're looking at the property as being able to stay in their home when they retire. Then as they age, they want to stay on their property. If they have a deed restricted unit, the ADU, and one of the, and the owners then want to move into it, is that a problem for those property owners? I think that's something that should be considered.
That's a good question.
A lot of people plan that in their future aging planning, I guess you'd call it. And the other thing, I think the shade trees, it's really nice, but I have a feeling the fire restrictions might axe that from your whole program. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. So that's a good question about, a senior like moving into the ADU and renting out their primary house dwelling unit. What does the deed restriction do to that situation?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that if I may. So they do need to still qualify for the income criteria that it's elected for. So so we do try to share that with applicants and let them know that if you are looking to maybe have a family member move into this, you should consider whether or not now or in the future they're going to continue to meet those income criteria to continue to live within that. And that income criteria can be found posted by the state. So, and it's varying by county. So,
would another potential solution be, I'm sorry, council would like to weigh in here?
I was just going to add that all of that would be spelled out in the affordable housing agreement that's recorded against the property. So the owners of the property would be able to look at the document to understand what is allowed and what is not allowed.
Great. Would a potential alternative be to create some scoring around ADUs as supporting multi-generational living? Multi-generational living is kind of a buzzword right now, having families live together, on the same property. So if you feel you can't qualify under, for low or very low, maybe you could under some sort of, multi-generational living arrangement. I'm just, reaching here, but maybe that's something that could be, explored as an alternative to the whole worry over the deed restriction for a senior. Councilmember Penrose, did you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say maybe a review of the criterion that we're using might be appropriate.
Yeah, Mr. Backup. Okay, well, I thought there'd be all kind of people here tonight asking questions or demanding answers. Okay, I'm going to call a short 5-minute break before we resume deliberations. So we'll see you at 10 after 9. That's about 8 minutes, actually. Okay? All right. So feel free to ask some additional questions or start with comments and recommendations if you have them. So I'm going to follow my previous process, and I'm going to start with Commissioner Hernandez.
For the Measure D allocation system, I think it would be really helpful for us to take a look at it mid-year, you know, far enough in advance where changes can be incorporated in, and they can be implemented by the January timeframe. The application process starts by December. June or July should give us enough time to, you know, some things may be implementable within a year and some things may not. That would be my suggestion. Maybe we don't need to do it every year, but I think 2020, I think was the last time I saw it done. I will say that we do provide feedback every year on specific things, and I think City Council has been reasonably responsive with most of those things. Some of us have made unreasonable requests. The Zone 0 stuff, we really need to take a look at that. And like the fences being made of wood that Councilmember Johnson called out, we are supporting types of plants that are, they might be native, but they're also high risk from a fire perspective. So we should consider standards around, is it native and fire resistant? And we might even consider allowing certain types of plants that may not be native but are fire resistant, like olive are a great example of they're super fire resistant, and it's good for us to have those types of things. So that clearly needs to be beefed up. And I know we don't have the Zone 0 regs back yet, so but we can start working on some of those. I think the mayor made the point of you know, providing additional points for structures that are fire resistant or function in that manner, even if we just get ahead of Zone 0. I think somebody who has an external fire suppression system that causes their property to act as a fire break, like the watering systems, I think those are highly valuable, and I think we should strongly encourage them. I think there are other regs with underground water storage that could be problematic. We're dealing with this in LA for a rebuild for our family house down there. So, but I do think the fire suppression systems are helpful. And if somebody's implementing some type of fire break, you know, on their property, and what does that mean? What qualifies? I just think these are things we need to be looking at, especially for larger developments. If somebody wants to build, 40 units of housing and they have the space to do it, if they're building a hotel and they've got wetland, that wetland can function as a fire break. So I think we need to look at those types of solutions, sort of as part of the Measure D process, right? If you have a project and it's got things that suppress fire, I think we should think about putting lots of points. If we're gonna give points for ADUs, we should do things that mitigate against disaster. And it's not just fire, we also have flooding issues that we have to deal with. So those are things, pragmatically, if we can pick off some of those and start encouraging people to get ahead of the risks, I think that would be incredibly helpful. I strongly encourage us to track any and all deed restrictions, and those should be available to the public. If they're available during a planning commission meeting, which is an open meeting, they should be something that's available to the public so we know. There's a history of not recording deed restrictions on projects that goes back on, not specific to this, but other things where we think something's been recorded and it hasn't. So a little bit of transparency, a little bit of visibility, it just, hey, you got extra points to do this. We want to make sure that it's trackable, it's measurable, and somebody's actually looking at it. So those are things that I think are really important. And the point, we should be tracking, when did you apply for everybody's project? When did you apply for the Measure D? When did it get awarded? Did you get an exception? That should be visible information. But we should also be tracking, when was the building permit issued? And as part of the Measure D process, my recommendation is we get an update on that every year. How long does it take to get something approved? Who got exceptions? And how long did it take them to get their building permit? And ideally, how long did it take them to get their occupancy permit? That is something that the public is asking for. And I think if we measure it, we can say, hey, city staff's actually doing a great job in this. We've improved tremendously over the last 20 years, right? Or we're going in the wrong direction. But right now, a few people make a lot of noise, and is it noise or is it real, right? And so without tracking it, it's real. So those are the things that I think we should be paying attention to.
Councilmember Nagengast?
Yes, well, I'm going to double up with what Commissioner Hernandez mentioned. I do agree, 6 years, man, really 5, it just turned 6, but to review the points and how we're awarding, and especially when things change over the years, defensible space and the fire requirements, it'd be good just to remind us every year, even if there aren't any major changes, but there are changes that do occur and that we are. I think the community and the public would like to know that we actually do look at these things and are making sure that they are applicable to what's going on today. Whether we move forward with some of we talked about something that may be a code amendment. I don't know how quickly is that something that would be part of our priorities. It was mentioned earlier. If that would, I think it was something else related to the Measure D. I think it was the map specifically, but I don't know if any code amendments, is that something that we would try to do this year? Is that something we would want to have moving forward? And that was specifically those 2 items that were mentioned in our housing element, the less than a full allocation for an ADU, and possible the rollovers. So that's also, trying to track these items. When something expires or unused, I would hope, and I think, I want us to be able to explain that to the public, how that happens, because I hear people are quick to talk about things they don't know what they're talking about. And I want us to be able to provide, no, this is exactly why we're doing what we're doing, because there can be a big load somewhere else that could be more than one Measure D, but there's something more going on than just they haven't submitted something forward. But at some point they may not either. But I think we should be able to track that, and also if somebody's hanging on to something and haven't submitted, we should be able to tell them, you have to do something. You can't just sit there and especially now, we're looking at possibly rolling these over. I think it's important to know if we have some additional Measure Ds available. So again, that's it for right now.
Okay. Commissioner Ruddock.
Thank you. I want to say kudos to Vice Mayor Penrose for shining a light on the scoring system and the laborious effort that unfortunately that is for staff. Akoi, would you do me a favor and show that sample scoring slide that you showed earlier, please? Because I want to propose something, at least as a thought exercise for us. The slide that is a sample scoring. Perfect. So having sat through this in Planning Commission, I'm acutely aware of how painful it is for the applicants, how painful it is for staff to try to tease out all the nuances of these scores that are so close together. And I think that it's diminishing returns. It takes an effort on staff's part that is inappropriate to it, and these scores end up being so close together, and they depend on such qualitative things in some cases that it's a fiction really that one project is a quarter of a point better than another. I mean, I just don't think it's defensible. So I think we should throw this out the window and use a system that would be more like ask staff to take a week in February, identify the ones that are clearly at the top of the pile, the deed restricted ones, identify a few that are just obviously losers because they're not even close, and do a lottery for the rest that are right in the middle, the fat part of that bell curve. You know, give people credit if they have been through the process a year or two before. But let's not pretend, I mean, it's just diminishing returns to try to implement these things. I say, do a lottery. If you lose the lottery, you get credit the next year for being part of it, and it would free up an awful lot of staff resources, and it would let people know in February rather than April that they've got the go-ahead with a certificate. So I realize that's a little bit, you know, you'll think of objections to why that doesn't allow us to incent the kind of projects that we want to see. But if you look at those scores, how, you know, they're so close together for what, the middle 60 or 70% of them. Just do a lottery. So that's one idea. On a completely different topic, I think it's very logical to consider awarding a fractional, requiring a fraction of a Measure D certificate for an ADU or a JDU. It's probably attractive to do something simple like, well, a half a point for an ADU, but I'd ask that let's do a little bit more thinking about it.
About that because of the defensible space. And then, of course, landscaping, you can see on the maps what we were looking at, it changes how that landscaping is going to look based on what they want now, so I think that needs to be updated. And I think the maps, I'm going to bring it back again because I've heard so many people bringing up the maps are not clear, and we need to get that corrected. So those are the only things to add.
Okay. Chair Gore.
Well, I guess I would say that one of the reasons that staff spends so much time on this is because staff is working with everyone who wants a Measure D so much. Like, they work personally with everyone to try to help them get to a point where they can get their project done. And it's actually one of the reasons that all those scores are so close, is because staff has been working with everyone and getting them to follow these criteria. Definitely, we do need to relook at those criteria and make sure that that they're fair. But I would say that that's actually really nice. That's what staff does, and that the people who are going through this process are not being treated poorly. Actually, they're being treated really well by staff. And so I would say also a lot has been made of the map and how bad the map is. But I thought that the transfers kind of address the map issue. Like, if you have things not included in you know, that there's a small number of applications downtown, and then you move them out and transfer them later on, like we did with this list, it takes care of a lot of the concerns that people have. I mean, Measure D was passed by the voters, and saying that it's poor in all these, you know, it's kind of the meta message is that it's troubled and we need to fix it and it's a big problem. But I would actually say, given, you know, how things have changed over the years, it's actually done pretty well. And that there haven't been a lot of people who are out of the loop or or not being helped or not getting application, not getting Measure Ds. A lot of people do get the Measure Ds. So I do think that the criteria is a little problematic, and it's hard because it's so subjective. And so I would definitely like to revisit that, in particular the fire issues, because that's the new big issue. But but in terms of like revising Measure, changing Measure D in big ways, I would say that would be up to voters. So, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Brownstone.
Well, I think it's great that we're having an opportunity to look at Measure D, think about what the original intent was, and keeping that in mind. And I applaud the efforts, to think about how we're talking about reweighting some of the criteria. Anything to prevent fire hazards is really laudable. And if we can incentivize those behaviors, that's great. It's a great opportunity. I also feel that we really want to be able, put ourselves in the place of customers, people looking to build. People buy lots here. They might not realize what some of the limitations are to build. Do they know what walkability is? If someone buys a lot, blocks out of are they thinking about that when they buy the land? Is the realtor knowledgeable about it? The person who's might helping them out, and the builders. I mean, we want something where everyone feels is well educated, and letting a potential buyer, a potential builder, contractor, really understand this stuff. Because, the reason people love to come to Half Moon Bay and live here is that we're not having sprawling construction and development. And that was part of one of the goals of, Measure D. So, but we really want to make everybody understand what they're purchasing, what they're putting efforts into, and, not feel disappointed. And, I don't even know, we had at least one realtor here this evening. And, we want to make sure, utilize that community as well, get input from them, say, yeah, what more do you really need to know if we have a client or someone who already lives out here and wants to buy another lot, to make it as a user-friendly a process. And so, yeah, I thought this was a great conversation today, and thank you for the wonderful presentation. I think we'd all would love copies of that. If you could put them online, your presentation was very helpful, and look forward to continuing the conversation, so thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I want to go back to the issue about staff time spent on figuring out Measure D allocations. It's too much time. And that may be because the criteria need to be changed. It may be because the staff is trying to be too friendly and helpful to people. That may be not their job. I don't know. I love a friendly staff, and I am not being at all critical of the way our staff works. I am thrilled that they work to make the customer feel comfortable and to help them as much as possible. But is that really their job? If we're trying to be efficient in government, then we don't want to have a system where it takes a year to be able to start building on something. It's too long. It's too long from a financial point of view for people. They lose money during that year. They're not able to invest in something that they want to invest in. our staff is so overworked as it is. Do we really want them spending all of their time doing this for the first 3 months of every year? I don't know. I don't know how much staff time. I don't know the specifics, but I do know that what I consistently hear from people in the public is, this city is impossible. You can't get anything done. It takes too damn long. And I think that's true of a lot of governments, and there is some truth to it, and there will always be some truth to it, I think. But I'd like to have us look at how much effort we're putting into this program, how much staff, what is it costing us in staff time to run this program? And really see whether or not we're getting our money's worth. Is that where the public really wants to put their money? I don't know, but looking at staff time and looking at the criterion list, I mean, they're all part of the same review process that I think needs to happen. And then the other thing I wanted to say was I definitely agree that ADUs should have a fraction of a Measure D allocation. Whether it's a half or not, I don't have a strong opinion on it. I don't know enough about how you divide those things up. But if somebody said, you know, half an allocation for an ADU and 25% of an allocation or none for a JDU, I'm happy with that. I think that's all I've got.
Robert, you wanted to add something? Yeah.
Thank you for re-mentioning that, because that reminded me that I forgot to bring up something regarding providing direction. So Councilmember Nagengast and I are part of an ad hoc committee looking at restructuring with a goal towards always focusing on improving service delivery with available resources. So, yeah, I would ask our planning department to, you know, start thinking about what kind of extra resources might we want to be able to provide, experiment, you know, if there's an extra person, extra contractor, how that would look, how we think, what would be the goal in terms of speeding up permit deliveries, what help do you need? So we can start taking that in consideration structurally over, you know, the next couple of years. So I'm saying ask and say, if we can get this, then we can deliver that. Let us know. That's what we're relying on you, so we can make those budget adjustments and make it work. It's a great opportunity. So.
Okay. So council has already given direction on fractionalizing exterior ADUs, potentially exempting JDUs, and looking at carryover. So I think, you know, we're all good with that. That's already, you know, on your work plan, so to speak. And that's good. As for the map, I think the map is problematic for the reasons I talked about earlier, and it's not consistent with the existing downtown map that staff is using, and we should have maps that are consistent for all of our different purposes. So I would support putting the map on November ballot. Just the map, not changing Measure D, not saying, do you want Measure D or not, nothing like that. But putting the map, a simple, you know, map change on the ballot. Because I'm concerned about the potential for future multifamily taking away from outside of the downtown area. And I think that's not, you know, fair. So I think we really need to look at the map. I don't know if I have consensus on that, but I see your point about it, and that somehow, you know, things are working, but I think there's, you know, some problems with it that could be addressed. And I don't like the idea that we have open space reserve lands, you know, lumped in, and I think all of downtown should be, you know, in the same downtown map. So I'm in favor of a map change. Now, I think Robert brought up an important point. The the idea of the amount of time that staff is taking, you know, in a process is kind of separate than, you know, the program that we have now. We have like a year to do something better for the next round of allocations for 2027. And I think we need to do that. We are looking at our departments to see, you know, how we might reorganize to do more effective delivery. Remember, you know, the ADUs in our single-family homes are still like, you know, a huge chunk of any development that's happening in Half Moon Bay, right? So they're working it, and they're trying to make a system that's complex fair. And the fact that you're taking to April, I don't really see much of a problem with that, but it could always be better. And I think the real problem is going from allocation to occupancy permit. You know, that, you know, the construction piece is bad, but we're going to be looking at how to do that faster and better. But in the meantime, I think we want to, you know, look at the allocation system. I like the idea of considering the lottery. However, you know, I do like the idea of incentivizing different kinds of development, you know, the affordable piece, but also, you know, the home hardening. People are going to need incentives to change the way we build, to protect existing development. And I think, you know, we want incentives around that, not just the fire department going around putting a red X on your door because you didn't do what was required, but that, you know, we're going to help you build better and stronger and protect your neighbors and the city at large. So I'm not entirely in agreement with throwing out the allocation system, but I think it would be useful to just look at how that might work, how you know, a lottery might work. Maybe we just have two buckets. Maybe it's affordable and fire, you know, protective. And then whatever doesn't fit in that, then you do a lottery on the 10 or 15, you know, that are left or something like that. But, so I'd like you to look at those sorts of things. And I would like council working with community development director to look at, sorry, computer's turning on. Look at the language about vesting and expirations, just to make sure it's clear in the code what the process is, so that it's transparent to people about how we assess that and when those, you know, those timelines are met or not. So I would consider that. So that doesn't sum up everybody's consensus. We heard concerns about, you know, changing the map, but I think everybody's on board with the fractionalizing, and perhaps the best thing to do is just bring this for further discussion to the Planning Commission to look at the criteria, look at the system, and have a bigger discussion about the map. Where do people stand on the map? I know that Patrick seemed to be in favor of it.
I would agree. I like the idea of one map, and because it's confusing, we say downtown, but except if it's Measure D.
Right.
I mean, I get it why at that time in the 1999, but wasn't that a redevelopment map?
Well, it was. Plus, we had a very short timeline to put something on the ballot, and we had to use the map that we had, and that was it.
Right. So I would agree on the map, and the other, with the less than a full allocation, ADU, and the rollover. But I want to make it very clear how these expire or not, or unused.
Map, where do you stand?
Legislative action, we need to put on the ballot.
Deborah?
Yeah, I agree. Also, for future developers coming in, we want to make sure there's a real clear understanding of it. They just can't. Yeah.
Yeah.
One map. One map. We'll have bumper stickers by next week. One map.
Deborah?
One map.
Rick?
I think it ties up a lot of things we've done with our LCLUP and the direction we've received from council over the last 10 years. It just makes a clean focus on the priorities we've been given, and it removes ambiguity. So, big fan of one map.
Okay, Steve?
Yeah, I think the things that we're talking about make sense. When it comes to a referendum in November, there'll be some more clever messaging necessary tell the voters why they ought to vote for it.
Yeah, we're not fixing the map, we're adapting it. David, still against the map? Changing the map?
It's not that I'm against the map. It's that it's being presented as the map is the problem, when really Measure D is working pretty well. We're spending a lot of time talking about the map, and the map isn't the issue. So it's fine to do whatever you want to do with the map and make things clearer. That's great. Put it before the voters. That's great.
And make sure that it's perceived, we're not actually changing the Measure D program.
Right. No, I understand that. Right. But I'm just saying, like, where the things to focus on is to make it so that the staff does not have to spend 4 months working with every homeowner in that intensive way and go back to them over and over again to try to get them to, I mean, it is helpful, and it's helpful to the homeowners, and everyone knows that, you know, you need to be educated about what these things are. And so some outreach is really important, but the staff, the reason this is all here is because staff is a little overloaded every year, and it's made drama. And so, you know, whatever we can do to fix that, streamline that, make it easier on staff, that's great. So.
Okay, so let's say we have consensus on changing the map and looking at a November 2026 map change, and, you know, the appropriate messaging around that. I think I did hear a thread of people wanting things to move faster, right? Part of that's going to be probably additional staffing, but I think there's some direction here to at least consider, from the perspective of the community development director and the city manager, and looks like Ocoee is working heavily on Measure D. What do you think? How do you think the process could be improved that would improve your quality of life in your job, but still maintain transparency and fairness? Think about the idea of the lottery. And you know, we have to start talking about the scoring system at some point soon, by mid-year, start that process. But in the meantime, think about, just honest among yourselves, like, what would work better? And how can we make that fair and transparent? You know, so there is some discomfort with people with the process. So, but you're the ones closest to the problem, and so we want to hear from you about what you think would work better, you know? So let us know about that. Patrick?
What about, because I've heard a lot of that we've talked about. I mean, I've heard other people telling us it's slow, it takes forever, and I'm not going to beat you guys up, but that's what we're hearing.
But everybody who is wanting to get, you know, a renovation or build a house, everybody thinks it's too slow.
Right.
You know? That's the perspective. It's
Right.
It's never going to be fast.
And I did this up in Truckee, trying to get a stairway in ADU or ADA compliant. It took me 9 months.
No,
so
that's insane.
Yeah, but so it takes time. I get that. So I'm just, so here I am in another area and I'm having problems, and you hear people here. What about a customer feedback survey, just to get some feedback from because they are customers, so that they could say, or it can be kind of like a bitch line too. You're bitching about everything, but at least you can get some feedback on this took too long and this went really well, because when we get precisely the customers where their concerns are.
Well, I think a lot of that is just going to come back negative, because when you have to spend money, you know, the kind of money that we have to spend here because of the cost of living and the cost of materials, it's going to be uniformly negative. I think I hear what you're saying, and, you know, maybe feedback survey when things are completed, like, tell us about your experience, as opposed to some just general polling. Tell us about your experience and record that experience and compile all those experiences together to get a feel for it, and have it not just be completely open-ended where people are going to go, I'm tearing my hair out, say, how was this, how was that, sort of break it down a little bit, and do it that way. But I think that's a lot to ask, like right now when we're short-staffed, but I agree that some sort of, touch on the public, is a good idea. So I think we've covered sort of the basic things that we talked about tonight. Is there anything I'm missing here that we haven't said? I just want to say, first of all, I think I'm amazed that staff was able to put all this together within a couple of weeks after the holidays. And I want to say how, grateful I am that you were able to do that and do it well. Very responsive and, very smart. And we have a great staff there.
Here, here.
Yeah. But I also want to say, we have some really good minds here at this table. We have a really good planning commission, very smart people, very engaged people, people with creative ideas, and that I think showed tonight, and I'm very appreciative of that too. Some of you are my neighbors and friends, and you're just really strong. Thank you. And the council for digging in and raising these issues previously and staying on it. So thank you all. Staff feel like they have enough to work on? Yeah, but let us know what you need to do that too, right? Don't just stew in a dark corner. Come and tell us, what you need to do this. All right. So,
Mayor Reddick, if I may, you mentioned a few minutes ago that, I think if I heard you right, the concept of staff coming to Planning Commission this year with maybe some fresh approaches to the Measure D scoring system. I think I could safely say that the Planning Commission will welcome that, and I'd love it if you could, as you look at that, maybe think of 2 or 3 different approaches to that. Maybe one with some incremental changes, and maybe another version with radical changes where we embrace the lottery idea, just to challenge our thinking on it.
well, and it really is something to think about. I mean, it would eliminate a lot of angst, I think, on the part of the Community Development Department. So, I welcome creative ideas like that. I think that's fantastic. Anybody else?
I just have one thing. It's not on the agenda, but before you adjourn, Maggie sent out an email regarding the Brown Act and some changes that are going on. And instead of picking them up at City Hall, I brought them this evening to you. So I'm going to just, before the end of the meeting,
Sweet.
I'll give
Thank you,
them
Bridget.
each to you. So
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for riding herd on the meeting tonight. All right. Okay. So, we're adjourned.